there has been things that have gone not right in my life that I've learned from in a huge way. Probably too personal for this particular interview. But for instance, I did some like not such cool things when I was 18, 19 years old. A couple things that you would call dishonest, okay? But from that day forward, I have been the most honest person, the most fair person, the most that I'm sort of known to be somebody that has integrity, whether it's people I work with or people I represent or whatever that is. I think all that comes from that wrongdoing when I was 18 and 19 years old.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Veridesk. Veridesk makes office furniture simple. Seriously, their height adjustable standing desk is one of my favorites and something I use every day in my video production business, especially when I'm editing. It was really the first step to create a happier, healthier me and a more productive workspace. Today, Veridesk has a full line of furniture and accessories for the office and the classroom that are easy to order, assemble, and reconfigure as your needs change. Ready to work elevated? Go to veridesk.com/behind the brand to learn more. Now let's get into our episode.
Hello there, I'm Sam Gores, Chairman and CEO of Paradigm Talent Agency, and you are watching Behind the Brand with Brian Elliott.
Hi, I'm Brian Elliott. Welcome to another edition of Behind the Brand. Today I'm here with Sam Gores at Paradigm. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I usually ask my guests, how'd you get this job?
I think I created it for myself.
Now you can take the timeline back as far as you want to go. I've heard stories of you selling shoes and, immigrating to this country. I've heard lots of different things. So I'd love to hear it from you, how you got started.
Well, I was born and raised in Nazareth, Israel, and my parents, I have 5 siblings, 2 brothers, 3 sisters, and my parents, when they were 39 years old, decided to immigrate to the United States, which ironically was from Nazareth, Israel to Flint, Michigan. So, went through most of school in Michigan, and then I started to go to college, but then decided to go to drama school. So I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York to go to drama school. Then later on, I transferred, and I was in the first graduating class of the West Coast branch of the American Academy. And once I got out of school, I knew that I wanted to be I loved the business, I loved the entertainment business, and I loved the theater business. And I decided that I knew that I wanted to be in the business end of the business, not in front of the camera, unlike this, but behind the camera or somewhere in the business end of the transactions.
Before we unpack that, because I want to ask, how you arrived at that conclusion, I want to go back and ask, so how did your parents feel about you declaring that you were going to become an actor? Were they pleased about that?
My parents were really amazing people. My mother, luckily, is still alive. Father passed away many years ago, and mother is going to be 90 this year, so that's pretty great. And she's a big part of the secret sauce, along with my father, but a big part of that because it's no surprise that, then I have all my siblings are extremely successful, which is I think pretty rare. She's a huge part of that. But they really just left life open for us to be the best we can be for as long as we expected the most from ourselves. So I can't say that they gave me a hard time because I was the only one and still the only one now, whatever it is, 45 years later, to go into this kind of business.
Yeah, so you're being very subtle about giving her the credit, and that's admirable. What are some of the lessons or the traits, characteristics that maybe she instilled in you or passed on through just DNA?
Well, I mean, she had an amazing ability to love and cherish and discipline and punish all at the same time. She was a bulldog and a tough a tough mom in that she, always wanted you to expect the most from yourself, but she never ever stopped loving you or bragging about your good accomplishments or filling you up with confidence. So I think if I had to say anything about my siblings and I, we're all pretty confident people, and I think that that was a lot of it was really filled by her. And then also as far as the DNA, the concept of bouncing back or of recognizing, wherever, like whenever there's been a setback in life, whether it's our life as a family or my life in business or any, one I'd observe, any one of my brothers or parents, they always looked for the opportunity beyond that setback. Never considered a setback until they found the opportunity that was around the corner from there.
So resilience.
So resilience and solutions to problems and all those things. I think that was, that was her teaching.
Yeah, I mean, changing countries, coming to a place like Michigan, probably no easy transition. What do you remember about early life? Did you assimilate pretty well? Was it difficult? Did you stand out? Did you blend in?
Well, early life was very interesting, difficult at times. I suppose you can say you get here when you're forced to be an underdog for so long, then you somehow, it makes you a tougher fighter. I think early life was, like early life, was really pretty good. Then by time, we were around, or I was around 10, 11, 12 years old, then there was a lot of fighting in the Middle East. And so I was 13 when the Six-Day War happened in Israel. And that was, I think, probably one of the reasons my parents decided, and then in 1960, so that was 67, so in 1968 to move us to the United States.
Mm-hmm. And did they have a pretty easy transition? Did they come over here and find work?
No, not at all. I mean, we found work because we had family here. So we had family that was in the grocery business. My brother Alec and Alec is just a year and a half older than I am. We were the only two that really could go to work at 14 and 15 years old. So we went to work in the grocery store for 35 cents an hour. Mm-hmm. None of us spoke any English except my father. And so we all had to learn English kind of on the fly. And that's pretty tough in Michigan,
yeah,
when you're just starting to go to high school.
In the 60s and 70s, I would think as well.
Yeah, that was pretty tough, 69, 70, 71. But believe it or not, we actually started speaking fluent English within 6 months or so. But it was tough because, there's a lot of kids giving you, high school, right? Kids giving you a hard time, calling you camel jockey and, doing all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So it was not, I wouldn't say it was easy, but it wasn't impossibly difficult. It just, you just were an underdog. You had to feel like you had to try that much harder to go out and make something of yourself. Yeah,
and what a volatile time, too. I mean, everything was happening literally, right?
Oh, yeah.
Man on the Moon, and, civil rights movement, and...
Yeah. That's the first thing I remember, actually, is Man on the Moon, because I remember when we moved to this country, it was a couple of days after Thanksgiving in November of 68. It was November 28, 1968. And across the street, I had an aunt living there, and I remember going across to watch, Man on the Moon.
Although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder.
Okay, I'm going to leave that 1 foot up there and both hands down about the 4th rung up. There you go. Okay, now I think I'll do the same.
For those who haven't read the plaque, we'll read the plaque that's on the front landing gear of this lamb. There's 2 hemispheres, one showing each of the 2 hemispheres of Earth.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's fast forward a little bit further in the chronology. So then, you get to high school, you go through the Academy of the Arts.
Right.
And you start to figure out what it is you want to do and what you don't want to do. Talk about that. How did you arrive at the fact that you knew you didn't want to be in front of the camera?
It's interesting. It's probably a series of things that happened when I was in school. I mean, when I look back now, because it's interesting actually to get to this point in my life and then look back. When I look back, I was always a little bit of an artist at heart. I'm kind of a singer, but I don't necessarily need to or want to do it, professionally. Mm-hmm. But I'll get up and do a song anytime in front of anybody or at a party or something like that. Okay. Yeah. But I realized that started very, very early on. I used to, when I was like 8 and 10 years old, the only thing we had, in Nazareth, Israel, was radios. So with no recordings, nothing. So I remember just would sit there in front of the radio and would just wait for that one particular song to come on. And then my father, who was really, really a great man, he played this instrument called the oud. It's like a pear-shaped guitar with a rounded back, right? Mm-hmm. So he played that, and he would play it, and I would, horse around with him and sing with him. So I was always a little bit, kind of meant to be in the arts, I feel like. Then so even when I went to high school in Michigan, by the time I was a junior and senior in high school, I was in plays. And I was doing things like, The Boyfriend and Annie Get Your Gun and The Sound of Music,
Very cool.
So I somehow always had a love for the creative business.
Yeah.
And so...
Well, and I ask that with context of, a lot of people who watch this show, regardless of age, I think one of the most amazing things about today is that in many ways, age doesn't matter anymore. It's about what you feel capable of doing, right, if you don't have a resume,
right,
or what you've already done to kind of show other people that you've got the chops. And I think people can continually reinvent themselves, right? And so I know just from the feedback that we read and talk about all the time, a lot of people feel kind of stuck. And I ask you those questions because I'm curious too about how you sort of found your calling, And I think what you're talking about is subtle but very important. I want to underscore what you're saying. It's an important lesson. It sounds like you had early signals of things to come, a foreshadowing, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. That you could see that being in front of people or maybe performing sort of lit you up, and that gave you joy. And maybe that wasn't going to be your calling all the time, but it was a signal, right? That performance, whatever iteration or shape it took, was important to you. Mm-hmm. And I don't think enough people look at signals, because I think there's signals all around us.
That's a really amazing thing, right? It's that you say that, because now, that I'm 64 years old, I look back and I realize actually life gives you lots of signals. You just got to pay attention.
Yeah.
Right? So, I'm now at this age with, roughly 42 years or however long it's been in the business. And 40 years later, I have a reputation of being a fair and decent person. I don't think you'd find a lot of people that would tell you I screwed them along the way or anything like that. And the truth is that signals of that when I was like much, much younger. I knew that that's who I was. That's the way I handled my siblings. It's the way I handled my family. It's the way I handled friends in college and high school and so on. The other thing is, I love the creative arts, but now that I look back, I was always also a kind of an architect at heart, right? And now fast forward all these years later, what have I really done? I've been in the creative business. I've been a business guy that is represented other people's interests. And then really I've been in architecture, in that I've taken people and pieced them together, or companies and pieced them together, and figured out how to make them all integrate in a way that's positive and successful.
Yeah.
And those traits, those signals are very, very, very early on. It's like it took me over 20 years, I think, or 15 years in the business to appreciate that I was naturally a good negotiator. Okay? But, when I was 12 years old in Nazareth, my mother would send me to the market, and which I would have to walk like for miles to get to the market. And if the ground meat had too much fat, or if I didn't get the right price for whatever, the watermelon, I was in trouble. So I had to learn to negotiate and make sure I did it. So, but in this business, it took me a long time to realize that it's not just a learned behavior. There's learned behavior, there's natural behavior.
Yes.
And I always thought whatever I did negotiating was learned behavior. I observed people, I learned quickly. I did my homework, and then I became a good negotiator. But later in life, I realized, it was learned behavior, but it was really most certainly a natural behavior.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you say that. We have this nature versus nurture discussion all the time. Super good insight. And maybe I add one more thing to it, which is you also, it seems like it took you a little while to figure this out, but I think it can take people too long sometimes. I think the sooner that we can arrive and understand that we need to lean into our strengths, double down on what we're good at naturally, I think the quicker the path to success. Would you agree?
Yes.
And I think maybe the inclination is to try and bolster or strengthen the things that are weak. But I don't know if that's a good use of time. If you're doubling down on what you're naturally good at, and as long as you love that thing, I think that's the real path to success. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, it's interesting because I think for me now, it's what I find most satisfying in life in general and my business life, is actually when I see certain qualities in people, whether they are my kids in life, like my son works here, or whether it's him, or young people that I've worked with here for many years. There's people here that have been here for 25 years and some for 10 years and so on. And when I see certain things in them, I think the most satisfaction I get now is to point that out to them so they can get to where they need to go a little more quickly.
Yeah.
And hopefully recognize that, if I see something special that they do that's unique to them, I try to get them to build on that. And that gives me a lot of satisfaction, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of something that I heard Picasso was credited with, which he said, all children are artists. The problem is, we get tucked out of that as we get older.
Right.
Right. And so we have whatever our gift is, whatever that skill or innate talent. Sometimes, whether that's a well-intended parent who says, you should be a lawyer or a doctor, despite the fact that you're an amazing dancer or whatever it is. Sometimes we get off course to what is our essence, or what we're sort of, what we're meant put on this earth to do.
Yeah.
I heard another good quote too the other day that was really inspiring. I think it was a Shakespeare quote. The meaning of life is to figure out what your gift is. The purpose of life is to give it away.
Yeah, that really is. That really is.
So do you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
Yes, for sure.
So back to this nature nurture. Do you think entrepreneurs are born, or are we made? In other words, is it learned, or is it something that we're born with?
I don't know that it's learned or born with. I think maybe it's nurtured.
And
I don't know that you can. Yeah, I don't know. On the other hand, I notice certain traits that I have that maybe my father had or my mother has. I notice certain traits in my son that are just like, in terms of just the only, male. I have two beautiful daughters as well, but he's the male version of me, right?
Yeah.
I see many, but I don't know if that was nurtured or if that he was born with that.
Yeah.
I think that he's got very powerful instincts. That's actually an interesting thing from what you said a minute ago. I think that, most people have, everybody has intuition or instincts. Some people's intuition is deeper than others, but everybody has a sense of who they really are and what they might really want to do. And then, like you said earlier, then ironically, their direction is clouded by secondary pieces of information, and that's when they end up going another direction. That's why sometimes people, they go off and they become whatever their parents thought that they should become, and 25 years later they return to who they really are.
Yeah.
And then they start pursuing that all over.
They might have made a lot of money, but they're miserable.
Right. Right.
And this goes back to the comparison thing too. I think that's what also gets a lot of people off track. And that's why I was curious about your path, because that actor path is very deliberate, and it's one that has a destination, and you already know what that looks like. But then you made a left turn.
Right.
And
I think that came from maybe a level of kind of control over. I realized that being an artist, you really don't have a lot of control. But loving the business and being in the business end of it, you have more control.
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Maybe it came down to that. I'm not sure that I knew that at the time.
Well, that resonates
know.
with me too,
Yeah.
because I came from the studio business, and about a decade ago, I cut the cord of having a real job, receiving a paycheck every couple weeks, working in a team of 250 people at a large studio, having a $40 million P&L, it felt very safe and secure until it wasn't. But I decided to, parachute out of that airplane for more control, because I was tired of waiting to get picked. I was tired of auditioning, in metaphorically speaking. And so, even producing this show, I totally understand where you're coming from, that level of control, because we get to choose. We have the creative freedom, the flexibility, and it's as scary as it is sometimes financially, it is. It totally the control factor and the creative freedom outweighs all the other stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing.
I can see that. I mean, we don't know each other, but I can see that actually in you, and just your observations and the questions you're asking, that your mind kind of takes you down a particular path that digs just a few layers down and into people, and then sort of capture a greater understanding of how you get from here to there.
I'm very curious, and I feel privileged. Like it's my way more beneficial. I mean, I started producing this show very selfishly. I had a startup 10 years ago. It was this little production company, and I desperately needed to know the secret sauce. And so I started reaching out to people who had already been there and done that, who'd been successful, and that's how this show has evolved. I think that's why people watch, is because through you, they're taking the knowledge and little nuggets of wisdom that they're learning today and taking it back into their side hustle or their small business or their big project, or maybe they're working in a company but they're trying to, figure something out. And they, these are insights, to help them grow their business.
That's really great. That's really great. And honestly, that's why I agreed to do this. I mean, I think when Liz Marenton first asked me, that's really the main reason, because I don't have any, deep inner desire to have people necessarily know my story. But I think about it and I go, well, you know what? If you're somehow a person that, you pick up one little thing out of this that you think is similar to where you are in life or what you want in life, and if that drives you to go, be better, then great. Then I feel like that's job well done. You know.
Agreed. And I think that, our metrics, attention is the asset and value is the deliverable. So we're really focused on, that value proposition, what we can deliver. So let's roll that into the next question, which is, let's talk about the F word for a second, failure. A lot of people don't like to talk about it. Some people even say failure is not an option, but that is actually a completely false statement, at least in my experience, because you can't have success without failure. So, framing it like that, what has gone terribly wrong in your personal or business life in order for you to get it completely right? And I'm not saying you've got it made and, everything is roses today, but certainly we're sitting in a very nice office. You have a smile on your face. Things seem to be going relatively well. Talk to us about maybe the past in order to get us to the present.
Wow, what a interesting question. I mean, I at this point in my life, it's like I always say, certainly the last many years, I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life, by far. Friends, family, kids, grandkids, business, everything. I'm the happiest I've ever been in my life. And and I also look back and I don't have many regrets. And so I don't know that I would say I've had things go wrong for things to go right. There's always the fear of failing at certain things, right? So, and that sometimes is a driver, right? That's sometimes a driver. But I appreciate how you ask that, because the way I would answer it would be this. I think there has been things that have gone not right in my life that I've learned from in a huge way. Probably too personal for this particular interview. But for instance, I did some not such cool things when I was 18, 19 years old. A couple things that you would call dishonest, okay? But from that day forward, I have been the most honest person, the most fair person, the most that I'm sort of known to be somebody that has integrity, whether it's people I work with or people I represent or whatever that is. I think all that comes from that wrongdoing when I was 18 and 19 years old.
Yeah. So smart, right?
So that is, I guess, a failure of some sort. And that really,
Change the trajectory of your
change
life.
the trajectory in terms of, living life with with integrity and, and so on, for sure.
Well, that's what it's about, right? We get to that crossroads and we get to choose. Do we repeat that same behavior?
Yeah.
I hear a lot of people say, if you keep doing the same thing, I think it's probably Einstein that said this, right? If you do the same thing, you can expect the same result. You got to
Right.
do something different to get a different result.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it sounds like you did that.
Yeah, and there's been, relationships, things that have been in my life that, that would obviously, set the stage for other relationships, other way you do things in life. But like a minute ago when I said I would hope someone would take something away from something. It's like, I remember when I was 24 years old or so, I had a girlfriend, and I was always late for everything, okay? And I was an hour and a half late meeting her, and she was standing in front of my apartment door for an hour and a half, okay? And that wasn't the first, whether it's friends or whatever it was, that's what I did. Then she got really, really pissed off at me. And the next day I go to work and my boss says, do you know that doing that, it's just really, when you break it all down, it's just a sign of disrespect. Because ultimately you're saying that you think your time is more valuable than hers.
Right.
So imagine if you were going to meet the President of the United States. Would you be an hour and a half late?
Right.
Okay. My point is, I've been the damn punctual person ever since. So, and somehow he made a deep impression on me.
Yeah.
And now I've been an impunctual person. I insist on people being punctual around me.
Yep.
And because it wasn't like, it's bullshit, you shouldn't be late for this. It was the fact that he broke it down to it's a sign of disrespect.
Yeah.
So the idea of disrespecting somebody just didn't seem right. And so, so those are little things that then, make an impression on you in the long term.
Even that, I mean, if we could break down that little lesson too, that takes a fair amount of humility. Because I think one of the most difficult things, we don't like to be chastised. I would assume none of us likes to be told when we're wrong.
Right.
Whether we accept it or not, these are
Right.
the facts.
Right.
But, I mean, that requires a fair amount of humility to sort of swallow that
That's
pride.
the fun. But that's a fun part of life, Brian. I mean, think about it, right? It would be so boring to just be stubborn and be right all the time.
Well, I
Right?
agree with you.
I mean, like, what good is that? But to have the ability to say, okay, well, you know what? Okay, this time I was wrong. Good point. Or you're equally as strong in the other direction. Like, no way, I'm not seeing it your way. As long as you're not, sort of one way. But it's boring to just be, not have humility about it.
Agreed. Success is a terrible teacher. That's been said a lot. And also, back to this idea of failure, I mean, I say it to the audience because I believe, because I've heard it so much, so there's a fair amount of people out there who are hiding. They're not putting themselves out there like they could or should because they're afraid of failure. Maybe they're stuck in this analysis paralysis, if you want to call it that. Or they think, if they take a risk, it's not worth the reward. Or perhaps even someone in your shoes who's, chairman and CEO, you may look at the people that are working for you and working with you, and at some companies, the culture of failure is not great. You lose your job if you make a mistake, whereas in other companies, they encourage it. And so I just think this idea of embracing failure, as long as we don't fail too far that we can't come back and fight another day, is really, really important.
Yeah. I think embracing the possibility of failure is even equally as important, maybe even more important, right? Because the possibility of failure is in front of you. And then what do?
Yeah.
Do you drown in it or do you fight harder?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I think failure itself, then yes, it's to me, that's just another learning tool, right?
Yes, the tuition you've got to pay in the School of Hard Knocks, right?
Exactly.
To get to where you're going.
But I think that when the possibility of failure is in front of you, what do?
What do you do?
For me, I 100% fight through it.
Yeah.
I mean, the possibility of failure has been in front of me thousands of times. And it's, my willingness to fight through it is really what, rather than just back down, walk away, give up. I don't have any of those things in me, for sure. And that's my mother.
For me, and this has been a learned thing, it's a signal now. Whenever I meet the resistance, that's a signal that I'm on the right track.
Right.
Right? If someone says you're crazy, that's a terrible idea,
Right.
You'll never do it, no one's doing this, why are you?
Yeah.
I think, aha, perfect, okay, and I run at that,
Yeah, it's funny because that's like my younger brother, Tommy, who's hugely successful and a great man. He always says his favorite, when he's in the deal, his favorite word's no, or not possible. Because now he's in it. He's got to figure out how it's not a no and how it is possible.
Right. So you're saying there's a chance.
Yeah. So
famous
that's
line.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go on the other side of the coin, which is, what are you most proud of? Let's talk about the business a little bit, the business that you're in right now.
You know what? I'm proud of so many things, right? I'm most proud of same thing. I'm most proud of in my personal life as I am in business, which is about balance. I think it's fair to say there are lots of people in my position in the business that the higher level of success you reach, sometimes the more screwed up your marriage or your kids or, whatever that is. And, the better human being you are in your marriage and you're raising your children and so on, the probably more success you gave up. So I always had a deep desire to be a good father, a good husband, but yet very, very ambitious and a deep desire to be very successful. I think I'm very proud of the fact that I have figured out how to balance both. I'm like a really good father to my kids. I put the right kind of time aside for them and my family, but yet I still work my butt off in business. And then the balance on the business end for me with that I'm very, very proud of is I think that you can be a decent person and still highly successful. You don't have to lie, you don't have to manipulate, you just have to be willing to look somebody in the eyes and say something, whatever, critical or aggressive or whatever it is, but still be, straightforward and honest. I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud that I didn't give up any level of success with dishonesty, and I didn't give up. Let me see how I say. I didn't give up any level of my desired integrity with dishonesty to achieve success, but I also didn't give up, a certain level of success by being honest and fair or having integrity. You know what I'm saying? I'm very proud of that. Very proud of to be able to do both successfully.
Yeah, it's a rare thing, but also there's sort of a law of attraction thing that happens along with that too, is that you tend to attract that kind of client as well.
Oh yeah.
And then, if you're in a position, which all of us really are in the position to choose our clients, then you get to choose the people that you want to do business with, even if they're the client and you're the agency, there still is a choice to take them on or not.
Absolutely.
So tell us what your business is about for people who don't know about, your business. Talk to about the company.
Well, this is, this company Paradigm is now one of a handful of the most important talent agencies in the entertainment business. Some of them are big media companies that have sports businesses and all kinds of other businesses. We've actually stayed away from sports, and we're mostly about the art. We like to say for ourselves that we are for the art and for the artists, and so we have a big music business, big television business, big film business. We represent many actors. I don't know, maybe a couple of thousand actors, writers, directors, producers. We package television shows. And then, of course, we have one of the biggest music businesses in the world. And so, we book all those, concerts around the world. And we have many pretty amazing clients, the biggest in the world, really. But we have stayed away from businesses outside of what is in service of the artist. Sports business is a great business, but we have consciously made a choice not to be in that business because it's a little bit outside being an artist. That feeds more like your branding divisions and other areas. And like I say, it's a good business.
Yeah.
But for us, we wanted our competitive edge to be everything that is around the artist.
So then what is the hardest part about being you? What is the hardest part? What keeps you up at night?
Nothing.
You got a good team.
It's terrible to say that, but not really a whole lot keeps me up at night. I feel like we've got a pretty good handle on everything, People here are really good people. They know what's expected of them. My family, I'm very fortunate. All three of my kids are now all grown up and married, and they're having kids of their own. and they're good, that would keep me up at night. If one of them was not good, that would keep me up at night.
Maybe I'll ask it a different way. So, someone who's not in this industry, what's something unexpected or something that they wouldn't know about this business, or managing artists? What's something that we may not expect? I mean, the kind of cliche image that I have is, you walk into the room with, the star, and he says, I want my water at 52 degrees, and I want only green M&Ms in the bowl. But what's something unexpected we might not know about managing talent that's important?
The devastating effects of them leaving you at a time when they shouldn't be leaving you.
You have any specific examples? Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, because usually it's the first time it happens is the one that's more impactful, right? So in the early 90s, I was representing Cuba Gooding Jr., Laurence Fishburne, when the movie Boys in the Hood was first released, right? And Laurence Fishburne is an amazing talent, always has been, still is my client to this day, all these years, 27, 28 years later, and he's pretty great. Cuba, on the other hand, was, younger and more vulnerable, if you will. He maybe thought bigger was better or whatever he thought at the time. He was always a good guy, but sure enough, right after Boys in the Hood, he decided to leave our then small agency, was called the Gores Fields Agency, and go with one of the bigger agencies. And I was as depressed as can be, when that happened. Then he made three other movies that he wasn't that happy with, and then came back. And he came back, and then that's when we got him Jerry Maguire, right? So
Game changer.
I worked very hard. That was a game changer for him, and it's a long, complicated story of how it happened. Worked very hard to make that happen. But Jerry Maguire happened, and the same thing over again. He wins Academy Award, he wins a Golden Globe Award, and then he decides,
grass is greener.
the grass is greener somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And of course, ever since then, we have said anytime he's wanted to come back, we haven't gotten there. But anyhow, and he's a good guy. I have nothing terrible to say about Cuba Gooding Jr. That's not the point. The point is that devastated me at the time. And those are the unexpected things. You would think, like, when everything is going great, why would somebody want to leave and change? And it isn't always the right decision, But those are things that are, answer your question.
So is this business all about who you know, or is it more about what you know? I mean, how did you do that? I mean, Jerry Maguire, huge movie.
Yeah. It's not, that's the thing I love about the business, actually. It's a combination of both, right? If you don't know anything, or you don't have a creative point of view, if you can't read a script and understand what that script could be.
Yeah, see the vision.
It doesn't matter how many people you know, right? So on the other hand, you could know a lot, but if you don't have any relationships out there and you haven't nurtured relationships out there, then what difference does it make how much knowledge you have? Because you got to have relationships to make things happen. So, and I think that's kind of what I love about the business. You have to have some of both to be really successful. Now, some people have lots of relationships and not as much knowledge. They can have some levels of success, but to be really successful, you have to have the ability to do both.
So what advice do you have then for someone who is just getting started and wants to be you in, 30 to 40 years, if they're just getting started? Because the argument is, well, I have all this ambition and, I'm gaining knowledge, but, the bigger companies, the bigger agencies, the bigger players, none of them will give me the time of day or return my call. What do you say to that? How do you break through to the bigger?
I think you have to let the confidence, you have to have a certain level of confidence, and then you have things you know. I think you have to let the things you know drive you to get to the people you need to know, right? And it really starts with a level of confidence of understanding. Remember, I talked about intuition earlier, or instincts. Understanding who you are and what you want to do. I mean, the fact is, I am, running and proudly one of the biggest companies in the business. And I am the only one, I think, the only head of any agency that didn't come through a traditional training program. I started working at an agency for free for 22 months, just to have them give me a job. And I started working for them for free for 22 months and learned the ropes that way. Eventually, I started making $70 a week and then, built relationships, and then started to have even more confidence in whatever my creative input was to a particular situation, whether it's an actor's performance or a script or whatever. So, how do you do that, right? How do you end up running a company this size, not coming through any of the big agency training programs, and not necessarily being, next to people, because, lots of those agencies are built with 4 or 5 people that are of similar age and similar levels of ambition, and they're, they get out there and do it. And my path has been different.
Yeah. Well, I just heard you say it.
So, so how did that happen? It had to happen with a certain kind of,
Well, I just heard it. I heard you say basically this idea of proximity. That you put yourself, if you want to be a ball player, first, go sell peanuts at the ballpark.
Yes.
You're in proximity of the place that you eventually
Exactly.
want to be, and then you work your way down from the cheap seats selling peanuts, and maybe next year clean up the rooms, and
Right.
then you pick up a ball, and someone sees you've got an arm, and then you get a tryout, and all of a sudden,
Right.
you're
and
on the team.
And then you just have to have the good sense to know. We've been in these situations, right? Whether it's the guy selling peanuts or whatever, he could start the wrong conversation with you and bore you to death, and then you're moving on. You're going to the other thing, or you could think this guy that's selling peanuts is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I want to get to know him more.
Yeah.
And I think that's the early on of being. If you're saying somebody wants to be me, what would they do? The early on aspects of that are really knowing, like when you finally get a studio head on the phone or a network head on the phone, and you want to, talk to them about a client, you got to know, get to the point in 30 seconds. There's no, hey, how you doing? What's going on?
Yeah.
I saw you at this blah, blah, blah. There's none of that. You have to have the good sense to know, get to the point.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, they're not returning your call the next time
Yeah.
unless they know you're someone that just is yeah. Then, of course, you build relationships, you become friendly, you start to go to lunches and dinners, and that's a whole other level of the relationship. But early on, you have to have the judgment to know who your audience is.
Excellent advice.
I mean, my God, I went to it was actually a basketball game. My younger brother, Tommy, owns the Detroit Pistons. And it was a number of years ago now, but it was one of the early on, like the opening game or something like that. And I had someone walk up to me that was in our business, in the music end of the business. And he started the most ridiculous conversation with me that didn't belong with me. He was like stoned out of his mind. And I've had, over the years, multiple people bring up this person's name to say, he's really good, would like to do this, would like to do that, and I have been shut down to the whole thing, would not even hear it for another second.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't make those mistakes when you're, working your way up in the business.
Sometimes you just get one shot.
Yeah. I mean, and even if the guy wasn't stoned out of his mind, he was just having an inappropriate conversation with the guy in my position.
Yeah, so I want to recap that wisdom because it's so important what you just kind of said. You talked about proximity. I think a lot of people are unwilling to pay their dues. And, you know, I used to be one of them. I probably was entitled and I was probably selfish. And then, you know, when I started my own company, I had a rude awakening very quickly that it was, you know, either sink or swim. And I decided to swim. But I think that idea of proximity, put yourself in a position where you can win, even if you have to take a pay cut or not get paid at all, eat dirt, you know, for a couple of years. If you're in proximity of that person and you've got the chops, you're likely to succeed. The second thing you said was you have to know your audience. And knowing your audience is key. Knowing yourself, self-awareness, you underscored, also very important, but knowing the other person. And I get this too at my level, you know, you're here, I'm here, but you know, the same thing happens to me all the time where people will say, can I pick your brain? And I just think, well, that's very selfish. I happen to know a lot about what I know, but like, what are you offering me? I don't even know you. Who are you? Why should I introduce you to, you know, this person who took me 10 years to get to know? And you want it just like that? I don't even know you. Like, it's selfish, right? So knowing your audience, knowing what's valuable to the other person is I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that we have to talk about it like this because it's so obvious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it doesn't seem to be so obvious to a lot of people. I don't know. Those are very, very important lessons that you said in a very eloquent way, but I think most people take for granted. Very important.
I think well, I have to say this has actually been kind of fun because it gets me to think a little bit about, you know, different than what my normal kind of daily thinking patterns are with what I do. But as I'm sitting here with you, I think about, I always say, and I have been saying this for years, that the greatest compliment you could give someone, especially a young person, is to bet on their potential, right? But I never, so I've said that, and I've always believed that. But now something else happening with this interview with you, which is, I'm thinking, what would happen when you're the one that's willing to bet on your own potential? When somehow life gets you to a point to where you believe enough in your own potential that you're willing to jump in and do whatever it takes. Take pay cuts, work for free, whatever it is, because you believe in your potential of making the right decisions and having the right judgment when the time comes.
I think that is only when the magic happens.
Yeah.
Playing it, another saying I really like is the riskiest thing you can do sometimes is play it safe.
Yeah.
And I was playing it safe for a long time when I was working at the studios.
Right.
Playing it safe.
Right.
I learned a ton. And it was great fun. I had a great time. But I had no idea of what I was capable of until I cut the cord and was completely solo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have no regrets.
Yeah. Good for you.
Yeah.
That's awesome.